I'll introduce them here, the speakers, in the order in which they will be presenting. First off, we have Dr. David Hughes. He's a professor of agricultural economics at the University of Tennessee. Dr. Jenny Thorvaldsen is an economist and data specialist with IMPLAN Group. Dr. Greg Alward is the founder and director of the Alward Institute for Collaborative Science. And Dr. John Leatherman is a professor of agricultural economics at Kansas State University. That's our distinguished panel. So moving on here to kind of next slide to kind of our motivation for this webinar. This was originally in response to questions about the problems with, specifically with 2013 agricultural data within IMPLAN. There have also been some questions circulating about the new structure of the IMPLAN group, and also then the new Alward Institute. So hopefully we'll address kind of those original questions and concerns. Then beyond these questions, we thought this afforded us a nice chance to discuss how agricultural data in general is generated and handled within IMPLAN. I thought that would be a useful discussion to have. And then lastly, we also thought this is a great opportunity to discuss the potentials for incorporating additional or primary data into IMPLAN, or maybe just a discussion of how we can think about agricultural data within IMPLAN. So that's kind of the welcome and introduction. So with that, I'll hand things over to Dr. Hughes.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Phil. I'm going to take a look at recommendations for improving IMPLAN as a tool in agricultural analysis and data structure. And just briefly, my outline, I'm going to have a little bit of initial discussion concerning the most recent numbers, the redo or the update of the 2013 numbers that just came out recently with the emphasis on the employment data. Then I'm going to talk about some recommendations about ways to interact and work with IMPLAN, and that's actually based on a group of people that I convened that I consider to be expert users of IMPLAN, and then summary and conclusions. Well, as a lot of you know, or probably most of you know, in terms of your ag sector numbers, there have been concerns about the basic data, especially the job numbers. But when we're talking about also total industry output, the various value-added components such as employment compensation, proprietor's income, other property income, and I guess I'm a dinosaur because I still use the term indirect business taxes, but that whole kind of taxes embedded in price is variable. And then, of course, employment. Traditionally, in using agriculture or looking at the agricultural sectors in IMPLAN and doing analysis based on those sectors, the production function has been a traditional concern, and there's some good older literature by people like Jensen and West look at that, and you have concepts like the fundamental economic structure, which indicates that services tend to be very similar or quite similar from region to region, but when you get into more natural resource-based sectors like agriculture, they can vary quite a bit. So that's a concept, or major concept actually, that we need to keep in mind when we're using, possibly making changes to our models. Another major concept based on the literature is this idea of holistic accuracy, ready-made models, which IMPLAN is one, and hybrid models, which are modified ready-made models, such as a modified IMPLAN model. Ready-made models are where you apply regional controls to nationally based linkages, which is what IMPLAN does. And then hybrids is when you come in and take a model like that to your region and apply your own data, which at least in concept should be superior or more accurate reflection, I guess, of your local information and linkages and knowledge in which you get stepped down from the implant. Holistic accuracy says that you need that individual cells in your tables, for example, individual values don't have to be exactly right, but what you need is that the model itself is sufficiently accurate to drive policy inferences. And that's really what we've got to keep in mind when we're using these models. My experience, and then talking and working with others also suggests that when you're going to these ready-made type of models, like with an IMPLAN model, that it is a concern, agriculture is a concern because of that natural resource base. And I think John Leatherman might get into this a little bit. That's really what he's dealing with, is the production function. But this whole idea of a holistic accuracy in terms of is what you're doing sufficiently accurate, or your model sufficiently accurate to draw inferences, applies here as well. We're talking about these big numbers like your employment values. Well, I've done some, or we at Tennessee have done some basic number checking using the Tennessee data. And so what we've really concentrated on has been the employment, and then some of the other estimates like the total industry output. But this number checking was based on a combination of NAS data, expert opinion, and even some farm enterprise budgets we brought in and looked at and saw if they were consistent with what the Historian plan was telling us. And so this is not a look at the national data per se. This is a look at the data for Tennessee, the 2013 data, that newer, most recent data, and just this statewide data. So I didn't do anything at the sub-state level. And the bottom line is really those new employment values are a big improvement. They make sense. When you check them against the NAS data and you talk to experts out in the field, they say, yeah, those values look quite reasonable. Also, the total industry output estimates were reasonably close to the NASH values. And then I just have done some limiting checking. I haven't done this for every one of the agricultural or farming sectors, but I've done it for certain ones where I thought they might be problematic. Just limiting checking or per unit compensation values make sense. Like returns to cattle farming were confirmed by some analysis that I did based on budgets that have been generated by our shop or our department here at UT, and those budgets are quite accurate. And so all of this checking that we've worked on really, in my mind at least, implies holistic accuracy, that what IMPLAN is doing is from at least this viewpoint, or this aggregate number viewpoint, holistically accurate. In other words, you could draw policy inferences based on these models, understanding, of course, the assumptions that you make, and be fairly confident about your results. Okay, there's also been some structural concerns about IMPLAN. I think this will be addressed later as well, but there's still issues like when you're in the software and you click on the help links, they're dead. Some questions maybe about ability response to concerns, our concerns as users. Of course, we've had this whole debate about the data and the process of generating numbers that we covered here. And then just ways to improve the analysis in general. And one possible reaction to the concerns, and this is based on an extensive group conversation. So what I did was I convened a group of well-seasoned IMPLAN sector users, people like Dave Swinson and Steve Deller, and kind of the usual I guess parties out there. And this is what we came up with, a possible set of approaches to making IMPLAN, quote, kind of work better, especially as it relates to the agricultural sector. So one is an upfront sounding board for IMPLAN approaches. You could have a convivious group of well-seasoned implant ag sector users, and they could provide that. It could be a sounding board. They could take the implant numbers and verify those numbers for the economy they know well, that state economy or regional economy. They could incorporate other data sources or look at maybe ways to incorporate other data sources to help IMPLAN improve what they come up with initially, like possible use of arms data and what John is going to talk about in terms of farm enterprise budgets. And then they bring in knowledge of local economies. Like, for example, as IMPLAN is showing an oil refinery in Iowa, that's probably a problem. There isn't one there, so how can that be dealt with? Another set of issues is just best practice seminars in IMPLAN conferences or conference the next conference, like different ways of conducting contribution analysis. People tend to do those slightly different. And could we get people sort of on board to do them the same way? And then perhaps a best practice user manual. So in summary and conclusion, I'm hopeful about the future in terms of working with IMPLAN and what IMPLAN is going to come up with. And I think we'll come out of this seminar feeling better about this and just looking forward to more work with IMPLAN, the Alward Institute, and each other. So thanks for your attention.
Great, thank you. One moment and we'll get Jenny's presentation up shortly. Okay, Jenny, we're ready.
All right, wonderful. I'll begin by expressing my gratitude also for having me on this panel. Thank you very much for this opportunity to chat about this important topic. So I'll begin with talking a little bit about the recent transitions that have gone on at IMPLAN. There was some interest in this topic expressed. So it pretty much began about 2 years ago when Scott and Doug, Scott Lindahl and Doug Olson, the founders of IMPLAN, sold the company to an investor group that was located in Pennsylvania and hired a new CEO and CFO who lived in North Carolina. And for these reasons, as well as thinking that you'd have better potential to hire new workers if we lived in a little bit warmer climate, the company moved from Wisconsin to North Carolina. And that was it was a little bit of a bumpy road for a couple of years. We've learned a lot of things along the way from the new CEO that we had, but it ultimately didn't end up being a really good fit. And so a couple more transitions ended up coming about in the past year. In the winter of 2015, the Allward Institute was created to be able to handle more of the research and development side of things and consultant type work. And as a nonprofit institute, this gives them access to grant funds, and it also allows them sort of the freedom to take more time and do some more of this research and development type of things that don't necessarily always produce a commercial product. Whereas IMPLAN as a company needed to maintain its revenue streams and all of this, so it was challenging for such a small company to be able to have its own R&D department. So Greg will of course talk a lot more about that as when he speaks after me, so I'll let him give you all the details on that. But that kind of spun off, so Greg Allward founded that and then took some of the former IMPLAN employees with him, so he can speak on that some more. And then that following spring, we actually transitioned away from the new CEO and CFO that we had hired when we moved, and we just had divergent goals between CEO and COO, and we found that we were losing a lot of focus and chasing a lot of different projects and priorities, and spinning our wheels in some things and not being very effective and efficient. So right now we have Ambrose Allward who had been our COO. He is also our acting CEO right now, and we are currently seeking a new CEO at this point. But we're very focused on that CEO being in line with our vision of kind of concentrating on our core role as a data and software provider, more so than a consultant or something like that. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a few things we just wanted to highlight about the farm data. It's some of the hardest data, or the most difficult data for us to estimate. I'll get into some of that next. After this slide, I'll talk specifically about some of the challenges with it. But regarding consistency year to year, we have always cautioned users that IMPLAN data can't really, or shouldn't, it's not ideal for time series analysis, I'll put it that way, because we are continually improving our data sources and methodologies, but also in particular, you might see jumps every 5 years because we get new BEA benchmarks every 5 years, and that's where we get, that basically provides us output, employee compensation, gross operating surplus, and production functions for all the implant sectors. And so this can end up being a big shift because we use ratios from the benchmark for a lot of things, especially for farm sectors where we don't have a lot of other data. So we rely on these benchmarks a lot. So then every year, if there's a new every 5 years when there's a new benchmark, it will be reflected. You'll see changes. And then also every 5 years we get the new census of agriculture. And so that'll change things as well. And so I know that all the webinar attendees did receive the document on how we create our farm sector data. So I won't go into the details of that right now, but I'm going to highlight for you on the next slide some of the challenges we work with. So we do get annual output data, but it is only at the state level. And we do use a mix of NAS and ERS, just depending on the crops that they cover. And then we distribute these to counties based on sales, ideally. But if we can't get information on sales, then we'll use physical production. And if we can't get information on physical production, then we go by number of farms, all from the Census of Agriculture. So again, those things change, those ratios. Ratioing out to the counties changes every 5 years because of that census. And then these 5-year BEA benchmark ratios that were mentioned in the previous slide and are detailed in the document, they're applied to these output values to estimate employment and income. Basically, we have no source of employment and income for all the farm sectors on an annual basis. And so we have CEW data from the BLS, but this is, of course, just wage and salary workers. It doesn't include proprietors, of which there are a lot in agriculture. And we've also found that the CEW data only cover about 90% of wage and salary workers anyway. So we can't rely on that data, but we use it to split BEA, REA employment numbers and income numbers, but the BEA regional data, the REA data, only provide one farm sector. So they don't have it broken out by the various farming sectors. So it's all very challenging. It's also lagged a year, the REA data. So really what we have annually every year that is up to date would be the state level output. And pretty much everything else has to be extrapolated from that somehow. So that's kind of the challenge that we work with there. Okay, next one. Thank you. So some of the challenges related to this is that not all data sources use the same categories. They once in a while will categorize a crop as something different than, as say a vegetable or a grain, than one of our other data sources will. And these do change from year to year. So that's something that is a challenge we have to deal with every year. And again, no annual data source for employment, kind of described that already. Also, we do have annual GDP data from the BEA, but it doesn't separate proprietor income from OPI, which is other property income. So we use benchmark ratios for that. And these data are also lagged a year, just like their employment and employee compensation data are lagged a year. One other interesting thing, when there are concerns sometimes when you're comparing output per worker over years or between places or between sectors, and it's a little bit challenging with a sector like farm where there can be some inventory and there can also be on-farm use of the production in that farm. So ideally what we want as a number in IMPLAN is actually the amount of production, not just the sales, because not everything that is produced is sold. It's either used on farm or put to storage. And so we try where we can to get production values, but they are only released by NASS, not by ERS, and they don't have the same crop coverage between those two. So for those crops not covered in NASS, we have to base our output estimates on commodity sales. So again, there's a little bit of, output isn't always equal to sales, but in some cases we only have sales to work with. So those are some of our main challenges that we deal with every year. And not just related to farm, but pretty much a lot of our users are interested in time series data, and some of them do use IMPLAN data in time series, even though we try to caution against that. But there's so much interest in it for all the various sectors and various users of IMPLAN that we have decided this year to actually create a data series that would be more amenable to time series analysis. So we're going back and estimating years 2001 through 2012, and this will all be very consistent. It'll all be using our current sectoring scheme and the same benchmark, which falls right in the middle of those years, so that's handy. 2007 benchmark, which is the latest one, and then consistent estimation techniques. So we learn and improve over the years, and so now we want to go back and re-estimate with our current techniques. And also related to that, more current data sources, because sometimes raw data sources or raw data providers will go back and revise their numbers. So we re-download the revised numbers and use those. So it should be quite consistent. And so we're right in the middle of that process right now of doing that. And we'll just see how popular that product is, but we're proposing to do that every 5 years, do a new time series. And then I'll just speak briefly on that we do have it in our plans at some point. It's just challenging with a small company, but we do, there's a strong desire from both sides, from our clients and from us as a company, that we would like to develop wizards, because it will just help users make sure that they ask the questions they should be asking, and that they understand what numbers they're putting into IMPLAN and the numbers that are coming out of IMPLAN. So we do plan to create some wizards. We'd also like to have more special spending patterns, and I in the past have done some work on this at IMPLAN to use enterprise budgets to get some spending patterns for more specific crops, and say irrigated versus dryland crops and this type of thing, but they never quite came to fruition. When we were in Wisconsin, we were such a small firm that it was kind of hard to do a lot of side projects, but we have grown significantly since moving out to North Carolina, and are prepared. We have a little more hands on deck that we could do that kind of thing now, and And I've learned that John Leatherman and the Alward Institute are working on some of those spending patterns as well. So I will let them speak to that a little bit more. And just the final point I'd like to make regarding the quality control, David Hughes did mention Steve Deller and Dave Swenson as being experts in this field and expert IMPLAN users. And we agree wholeheartedly, and we're actually have already agreed to, or they have agreed to work with us to do some quality control checking of our agricultural data before we release it to the public this year. So we're very excited to be working with them, and we're super open to hearing feedback and suggestions from anyone as well. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Jenny. So now we'll go over to Greg Alward. Just one moment as we switch screens.
Okay, and thank you for inviting me to discuss this with you. Really, I think my charge is mostly to introduce you to the Alward Institute for Collaborative Science and discuss a little bit the relationship between the Institute and IMPLAN Group. First off, Allward Institute is an independent 501c3 research and education organization. It's entirely independent of the IMPLAN Group company. As a nonprofit organization, it's governed by a board of directors. I am the chair of the board of directors. Scott Lindahl and Tom Rutherford are also members of the board of directors. The board of directors are uncompensated positions. We also do have a science advisory board, and Dr. Phil Watson is the chair of that science advisory board. That's an advisory board to guide the research and education efforts of the Institute. And I'm thinking that the science advisory board will probably grow as projects come to fruition and things like that, maybe either on an ad hoc basis or a more formal basis, but that's all driven by Phil. The staff of the Institute, Linda Schick is the executive director, and then we have a distinguished research staff, Steve Cook, formerly with the University of Idaho, and David Kay. All three staff members are former employees of IMPLAN Group, but now are employees of the Institute. So there are no financial or relationships between the Institute and IMPLAN Group. Just a little bit of history about how the Institute came about. It's a 501c3 research and education corporation, meaning that it's a corporation, and then there's an application to the IRS for nonprofit status in a particular mission, that being research and education. The letter of determination by IRS was received by the Institute about the first of the year, so it is a legitimate nonprofit organization that is entirely independent of IMPLAN Group. It is funded, it's a charitable organization funded entirely by donations, grants, and some limited work in terms of, say, research contract for service. The IRS determination makes us eligible to either apply for or participate in research grants from the government, like NSF grants or NIFA grants and things like that. The Institute received no financial endowment, but it did receive an endowment of all the historical IMPLAN data sets, and we're free to work with other research organizations and utilize that for for whatever purposes that we'd like to do. So basically the mode of operation for the Institute is that we bring research experience and empirical data on social accounting to research partnerships. So it's basically we have data and we have experience, and we're looking for partners to see if we can move the science forward. Just a quick look at some recent projects that we've had at the Institute. We've done a forest products market analysis for the state of Michigan, for the Department of Ag and Rural Development, the Department of Natural Resources, and also Michigan State University was partly involved in that. It was really three parts. We looked at comparative analysis to identify markets for forest products in the state, did a number of ASAMS type comparative statics over time, over different states, and particularly over sectors. We also included a structural path analysis to look at decomposing the multipliers into the supply chain, so we could track in great detail how the forest resource moved from resource to end uses, and then also applied network analysis to identify supply chain bottlenecks, so that we could look at the characteristics of the structure of the Michigan economy and how to exploit new markets in forest products there. We are also working in the area of computable general equilibrium modeling with Tom at the University of Wisconsin, and also Phil at University of Idaho. What we're putting together is a standard build process to produce canonical CGEs using IMPLAN as a data source. One problem that we're trying to come up with a solution for is that the gross operating surplus coefficients in the standard IMPLAN SAMs are actually net numbers, and so there's a number of negatives in there, and we're undertaking a process to be able to replace those with long-term return to capital coefficients, so that we don't have to do a lot of transformations to get from the standard IMPLAN accounts to CGE compatible data sets. One additional thing that might be of interest to the ag folks is that we're in the process of developing a GTAP compatible state level MRIO CGE, and I know that's used, GTAP's used a lot for international trade in agricultural products. Basically what we have been doing at the Institute is building up data sets of what I call very large scale arrays of social accounts, either for all states or all counties in the United States for a number of years. Basically what that allows us to do is to treat the social accounts for regional areas as panel data, and then we can do a lot of statistical analysis on the structure and function of regional economies, calculating, looking at things like economic diversity, contribution analysis, comparative advantage, etc. KSAs are knowledge, skills, and abilities. We can look at detailed attributes of the labor market. We're also re-engineering IMPLAN's commodity trade modeling system, how the trade models trade are estimated, and that to introduce more flexibility in that process, and then developing a analysis services program interface with systems like FEMA's HAZUS system, so that damage scenarios can be sent over to an analysis service. So they basically have a system-to-system communication. The project with John, and John will speak in more detail about this, but I just want to say a couple of things about that. There's an opportunity, I thought, that we could utilize the data that is available at KSU on both ag budgets and cost of production data, so that we could systematically use the budgets to disaggregate the production functions in IMPLAN SIM build process for the ag sectors and do this systematically, since we're re-engineering how SAMs are built, and if we can use the data from the budgets to disaggregate in systematic form the production functions, then I think we're making some progress on doing things in a more systematic fashion. That way we'll be able to differentiate production functions for ag by geography or by commodity or by enterprise. The other advantage is that I think building things up from ground level, since the budgets have yield information in them, I think it may be easier to tie things at the ground level from the budgets to the things like NAS output statistics and things like that, make that a little clearer relationship. I think the biggest advantage, though, is that the budgets, I think we can glean the quantity of labor input from the budgets in terms of, say, hours, and then separately build a relationship between the labor input to counts of jobs. I think there's a big gap there in the quality of the information. So basically, the budgets will tell us what the quantity of labor is. Whether those labor hours are wrapped up into units for a job that's in the formal employment market, or if it's volunteer labor, or if it's family labor, uncompensated labor, proprietor labor, and things like that. I think dealing with separating out the various transformations from quantity of labor hours to ultimately jobs count would be, I think we can tease out those relationships a little easier this way. And then also that the detailed modeling with the budgets for the detailed agricultural commodities, since we're working on the commodity trade model system, I think we can apply the trade modeling system to the detailed commodities from the disaggregation as well. With that, I think I just wanted to add one more thing that's not on the slides. IMPLAN Group has a site license now with the Department of Agriculture, and that means that IMPLAN is available throughout USDA to any USDA staff people. That's all being coordinated within USDA by Janet Perry. She's the chair of the IMPLAN Users Group within the Department of Agriculture. The Secretary of Agriculture asked her to form that group. And I just mention it in terms of work that y'all are doing out there throughout the universities and so on like that. It may be a possible link if you have like NIFA grants or something like that, that you can make a relationship between you doing IMPLAN in your environment and IMPLAN within USDA. So with that, I'll pass it on to John to talk about the ag budgets.
Great, thank you, Greg, and thanks for that additional information too. Very interesting. All right. Oops. All right, John, you're on. If you want to put it in full presentation mode.
Okay, I knew how to do that a few moments ago, and now I'm not seeing where it gives me the option to do that.
Okay. I think it's up in, if you go to slideshow, and then from slideshow.
Oh, okay.
And then, yeah, from current slide.
Okay. I'm sorry about this. I actually thought that I knew what I was doing for a moment there.
That's okay. You can just have it in the way that it is now and go through it manually.
Okay, well, I do apologize for that. In fact, and now I've got to get it on to, there we go. What I'd like to talk about is an initiative that we're undertaking with the Alward Institute to try to customize ag sector data here in the state of Kansas. In fact, the original idea for this work it came from Greg Alward a couple of years ago when he asked whether or not we in Kansas had access to a lot of farm budget type data. And in working on the project, actually Steve Cook with the Allward Institute is really doing the heavy lifting there. And so I'm just really trying to supply them with some inputs while they work through all of the challenges of actually incorporating this type of data into the IMPLAN system. I am drawing upon information from the Kansas Farm Management Association. It is one of the largest such farm management associations in the United States. It's either first or second largest, with over 2,300 farm units represented within that database. And so indeed, from the Farm Management Association, we have state and regional farm enterprise summaries. They do not like to call them budgets because they represent actuals, whereas they perceive budgets to be a goal statement, some number to hit. But what we have in our summaries are the actual revenues and expenditures that these farm units are experiencing. And so in using those, I call them budgets, there are actually 9 types of livestock budgets, 11 non-irrigated crop budgets, 4 irrigated crop budgets, 3 types of tillage systems, 2 cropping systems, as well as 6 regional types of budgets available. And indeed, in 2013, there were 34 types of budgets that they had published. Now, utilizing this budget information isn't perfect. They have their weaknesses. They are non-representative insofar as members of the Farm Management Association are generally sort of in the middle of the spectrum. We do not have good representation by either very large scale or very small scale farm enterprises. As you look at these budgets, you have to consider what was the purpose behind the construction of those summaries, and in fact, they are principally for use in taxation, and so they are built with sort of an accounting perspective in mind and not an actual economic expenditure and enterprise type perspective. And indeed, as you look at these things, you kind of wonder to yourself, you know, of course, nobody can make any money in agriculture because the margins are all very small. But once again, that's because it is used for tax purposes. Therefore, they're going to require some adjustment in terms of moving some of the budget numbers around within the various categories that are available. Even with the large number of farm units that we have, in some types of enterprises, the numbers do get pretty small, and there is some question as to how representative they are within that category. And in some cases, it's simply going to be impossible to create a benchmark for some types of enterprises to know what the total level of production is throughout the state. And so once again, these are not perfect. They are going to require some adjustment as we go forward. Just to give you a sense of progress to date, on my end, essentially I'm sticking right now with a state level focus. I'll worry about busting it up into regions and counties at some later point. It looks like I'm probably going to be able to end up with 7 specific non-irrigated crops represented, 4 irrigated crops, 2 types of beef cattle enterprises, as well as a dairy sector. Then we'll also have the other crops and other livestock sectors, which to some extent I'm anticipating may need to be treated as residuals to make sure that it balances all within the ag sector and doesn't affect anything else within the social accounting matrix. I feel as though I've been able to establish good benchmark numbers for both irrigated and non-irrigated crop production values. as well as benchmarks for all other sectors that are represented in these categories that I'm hanging on to. And sort of naively, I went about the process of coming up with what I believed, in consultation with my colleagues here in the department, to be the best estimates that we could come up with, and then went and cross-checked that against various sources in the Census of Agriculture and NASS data. And indeed, I find that most of those benchmarks are pretty good, and I feel on behalf of the Alward Institute greater levels of confidence then that they can use those benchmarks confidently with a minimum of error. We're still struggling a little bit with some of the cattle finishing information that we need to have represented in the Kansas accounts, just simply because of the very, very large amount of cattle imports that come into the state. There are a number of challenges that remain that I, as well as the Alward Institute, will need to sort of struggle with. I still have to figure out how to rebalance those budgets and to reflect the actual revenues and expenditures of the enterprise. I'm going to have to deal with scale of production that otherwise I don't have good information for, and I likely will work with the various commodity and livestock associations to essentially figure out at least a very large scale versus a moderate scale type enterprise. And I haven't even begun the process of thinking about how good will the data look once we start breaking it up by region and county. Just anticipating some of the challenges on behalf of the Allward Institute. Functionally, what I'm going to be able to give them is a budget and one number that I think is going to be the best benchmark that needs to be achieved with that given production sector. It'll either be output or perhaps value added, and then they're going to need to sort of build out all of the other necessary IMPLAN elements in order to make it work within the SAM and IMPLAN system. Obviously, in Kansas, we only have a certain set of crops. They're going to want to essentially establish budget templates that allow them to handle different types of crops, whether it be tomatoes from California or oranges from Florida. They will look very different than my beef cattle crops. My belief is that there are some significant challenges in rebalancing the trade flows to these specific sectors, and ultimately it will be up to them to protect the integrity of the entire system such that it all adds up to known benchmarks at state and national level, and we kind of keep things the integrity of the system intact. How am I taking care of this funding? Well, for this particular portion of our work, I'm anticipating well, first, I guess, as you might anticipate, I'm kind of on the hook for a pretty little sum of money in order to make all of this happen. And we're going to get that figured out later, but here's who I think I'm going to be able to get it from. I've got great support from the Kansas Department of Agriculture, who is leading the charge in working with these various agriculture organizations, and we're going to try to get them each to sort of ante up to help cover the cost of this. We feel very good and confident about it. Farm Bureau is already on board. But all of these commodity and livestock groups, they'll be able to see themselves represented specifically, and so they can see precisely what their kind of piece of the action is. I guess what goes along with that is a little bit of hazard, if you will, because now we are going to be presenting numbers that they need to believe. And they have their alternative sources of information, and we're going to have to be able to come in pretty close with what they are used to seeing. And so it'll be interesting to see how well that matches up. From the Alward Institute's perspective, their objective is ultimately to build a system that is accessible by way of affordability, to be able to replicate the system across states and then ultimately update it across years. We cannot buy into a system where the basic data costs $5,000 and then doing something special for agriculture costs another 30 or 50. So it's going to, that's going to be the great challenge for the Alward Institute, is to make this accessible. I guess from my standpoint, this whole notion of customizing this ag sector data, it will be good. It will certainly be a great improvement. But as far as I am concerned, it's really only a means to a greater end, because the next steps, and I haven't reached agreement with the Allward Institute to do this yet, but the next steps I would like to see are the ability to incorporate water inputs. Once we've got irrigated and dryland agricultural production about right, what I'd like to do is bring in irrigation water as a production input. And here in Kansas, we're blessed to have some 25 years of very detailed irrigated water use records. And now what I want to do is to begin the process of asking and answering some questions with regard to the value of water. And this ultimately is my target. The Ogallala Aquifer, as you're all aware, is facing some significant challenges, and I'm hopeful that I'm going to be able to secure the resources necessary to contribute to that, first by incorporating water input, irrigated water inputs into the Kansas portion, and then ultimately extending what we've learned here to the entire Ogallala Aquifer region. Ultimately, I think on behalf of Allward and IMPLAN, the objective will be to essentially begin tackling some of these very challenging issues relating to climate change and changing use of water. And indeed, the world has changed, the water shortage is here, and agricultural production will change as well. And this is, I hope, will allow us to be able to deal with that a little bit. So with that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I think that Phil will take it over from here.
Yes, all right. Thank you to everybody. Now we're going to try to address some of the questions that were raised. I think we have about 5 minutes. Is that sounding right, Karen? Going to assume that's true. So first off, there's a few questions for Jenny. Oh, maybe those got taken off. Actually, here, I'll start with a question for Greg. Are you doing anything with occupational mapping into implant sectors?
Yes, yes, we are. That was the part about KSAs that were on some of the slides. KSA standing for Knowledge, Skills, and Abilities. Basically, we're setting up the accounting structures so that you can map from industry to occupations, and then from occupations to knowledge, to skills, and to abilities associated with that. So I think we'll have a fairly complete characterization of those kind of qualities for the labor force as integrated into the accounting system.
Okay, great, thanks. Here's the one for Jenny. So more on the quality controls, Jenny. How do you satisfy yourself the data sets are sound and ready for distribution? For example, when this person uses IMPLAN, there's likely a strong difference between IMPLAN value added versus state. So how do you reconcile those, and how do you know when good is good enough?
Okay, that's a great question. We actually, last year was a challenge. Quality control is a particularly larger challenge when it is this every 5 years, because it's a little bit hard to know whether it's just attributable to these 5-year things that come out. or if it is a mistake. We also changed our sectoring scheme, so mapping from this year's to last year's and comparisons like that did make it particularly challenging. We do quality control all along the process, and because of this past year's issues with farm employment, we definitely have stepped that up significantly. And we're now, especially things where we're working in spreadsheets and it's so easy to make a manual error, we are cross-checking any work I do. I pass off to my colleagues and they look at it and step through every cell and make sure nothing looks fishy, and if it does, then I fix it, and vice versa. So we're definitely sharing with each other. And then toward the end of the year, well, this year I think I did mention that we will be passing on our farm data to Dave Swenson and Steve Deller to do some looking at it, and we do also pass it on to Scott Lindahl and Doug Olson, who just have been doing this for over 20 years and have a better eye for what might be a fishy number, as those of us that are a little bit newer to IMPLAN are still developing that eye for that. So we do have a lot of eyes on it. We're also trying to develop right now, currently, we have someone on our staff working on some more automated quality control checking at the very end stage when models have already been built. Because right now, as part of our data production process, we don't actually calculate multipliers. So we don't look at multipliers. You can't see them until you build a model with IMPLAN Pro. And so that makes it kind of hard to compare across regions and across years. So we're developing ways right now so we can look at multipliers and other things like that before we release them. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I don't know that there's ever, it's just getting more eyes on it, and we're in the process. So that's how I would say.
Okay.
We compare a lot. We compare a lot to previous years, and we do compare to, we check our raw sources and things like that. So we do a lot of checking, but every once in a while something will slip by. Hopefully that'll become less and less.
Okay. Maybe this is the last question I'll have a chance for here, but to John Leatherman, it's been asked in other states, ag budgets are based are not based on empirical data, but kind of on expected or data. Is that true for Kansas? And what do you do with kind of average or expected data versus actual data?
My understanding with these enterprise summaries is that they are average actuals for the year. And indeed, ultimately, they are published at a given date, and then they are actually checked as additional budgets are received, and they have more data to estimate those numbers. But these enterprise summaries are the actuals, and they have a whole nother area within the Farm Management Association where they publish budgets for benchmarking purposes that establish some desirable goals for a producer to try to shoot for, or to otherwise make adjustments within their enterprise. And so I think that these enterprise summaries are indeed what we might desire as actual revenues and expenditures experienced within a given data year.
Okay, well, thank you to everyone. I think that's the time we have for this. But again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for everyone who joined us.